Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week I continue my series on the Star Wars games by talking about the Wizards of the Coast D20 based Star Wars games. First Edition Revised, and Saga Edition. These were all based on various iterations of the D20 system, with the First Edition and First Edition Revised being more heavily based on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition 3.5, while Saga Edition had a stronger basis in D20 Modern. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about the D20 Star Wars. So let's just get the most basic element out of the way. This is something that all three of the versions had in common, and that is they were based on the D20 system. So that meant that it was you roll a D20, you add skills or base attack bonus or any bonuses you had to the roll. If you rolled high, you won. That was pretty much the system. They had the classic strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma attributes. And for the most part, that was the system. Now, where each of them worked differently is how they approached Star Warsing that system. First Edition and First Edition Revised both worked the same way. The individual classes all had an assortment of abilities, and they got certain levels. First Edition did not have much flexibility in these. It was the 3 Force classes: Force Adept, Jedi Consular, Jedi Guardian. They each started with a specific Force feat. Force Adepts had Alter, Consulars had Sense, Guardians had Control. And then at certain specific levels, they got the next feat. And it wasn't pick one of them. It was at this level you got Sense. At this level you got Control. For the Noble, they had a number of really great abilities. Inspire Confidence, Command, which basically amounted to buffs that they could give. Command, they gave a bonus to teamwork tests. Inspire Confidence, they spend a round speaking, and it gives their allies a bonus. And then they had Call in a Favor. They got this at first level, 3rd, 5th, etc., all the way down. And what this ability was they could call in one favor every time they got it. They could save up favors to a maximum of 5. But these would be things like they would get vital information, get a piece of equipment that was needed, anything like that. But they could only get a certain number of them. Now, First Edition Revised changed this up a bit for all of these. For the Force-sensitive classes, they got Force training at certain points. First level and then at certain levels. And at these points, you could pick between Alter, Sense, or Control. the noble, instead of getting a limited number of favors over their lifetime, got a ability to call in a favor and got modifiers to it. One of the other changes into the revised was in the first edition, deflect blasters and redirect blaster attacks were feats. For the revised edition, they were made into inherent abilities to the Jedi Consular and Jedi Guardian classes. But that was pretty much the major change. Both of them had some force abilities that were feats, some that were skills, and you had to use your limited selection of skill points to improve these skills. And ultimately, this was more D&D in space than it was Star Wars. And this is why I think ultimately we got Saga Edition. Saga Edition is the one where they changed everything. And it felt a lot more like Star Wars. But before I go talking about that, they did do something very interesting with the first edition revised. You had hit points equal to your Constitution score. And then you had Vitality. Vitality is what you rolled every level. And abilities would sometimes draw off Vitality as well. Because Vitality sort of represented your fatigue, while your hit points represented actual physical damage. This was because they wanted to emulate the whole... Most of the shots people got in the movies were like to their robes, glancing shots, and just wore them down and fatigued them rather than actual doing physical harm. While anything that actually hit and did physical harm was a debilitating or crippling blow. So they went with this method. And when you rolled a critical hit, critical hits bypassed the Vitality and went straight to wounds. And some weapons were capable of taking out someone in a single critical hit. Of course, if you were dealing with grunt minions, a critical hit just outright killed them, while heroic scale stuff, it went to their wounds. But Saga would take a different approach to that. And in many ways, it was a more novel approach. Saga Edition kind of set things on their head. You see, Saga Edition went with a concept of feats and talents for how you built a class. And while each class had some things that they automatically got, for the most part, it was at first level, you got your starting feats, your character first level feat, and a talent for your class. And then you would be alternating getting feats and talents through your tree. Some classes got more feats, some classes got more talents. Prestige classes got a special abilities in place of feats. But overall, it was you used your talents to build the class. And that was a bit novel in and of itself. In fact, it meant multi-classing was more of an idea of, I'm going to take this class for this talent tree, to get access to this talent tree. And when I level up, I'll take the talents there. And it was more about building a unique set of abilities rather than going for whatever got the most pluses. Now, the other interesting change with Saga was they didn't have armor class. They didn't have saves the same way others had. Instead, they had reflex defense, will defense, and fortitude defense. And basically these were armor classes instead of saves. When you attack someone, you went against their reflex defense. Some force powers or some weapon attacks, like gas attacks, went against the fortitude defense because it was how tough someone was that helped them shrug it off. Others went against the will defense. And that was the basics of how it worked. Instead of having skill ranks, you chose whether you were trained in skills or not. You automatically, every level went up in your skills. And when you were trained in a skill, you got a bonus to that skill. Now, combine this with other feats and other abilities that gave you more bonuses to specific skills, and that worked really well. Instead of having a plethora of force skills, they had one force skill, use the force. It was versatile, and when you take into account the various talents you got, that's how it worked in. You would use it to power the various talents. Now, there were force powers that were separate from your talents and your feats. And how you would get these is you would take the feat force training. And that would get you a number of talents equal to 1 plus your wisdom modifier. Use the force, by the way, was based on your charisma. And if you took these feat force sensitive, that made the skill use the force a class skill. So they didn't need the force adept because anybody could be a force adept. You just take the force sensitive feat and use and train and use the force. That was basically all you had to do. You could be a soldier who was a force adept. You could be a scoundrel, a scout, noble. And it worked perfect. Jedi more became the force sensitive lightsaber wielding warrior class. And even then, there were ways to take that and not end up using a lightsaber. You had to work at it, mind you, but you could do it. You could also, how the rules worked, you could also take the Jedi class as a class later in your development, not be force sensitive, and use a lightsaber. There were actual skills, there were actual feats and talents that worked with the lightsaber that did not involve using the use the force skill. So you could actually be a skilled lightsaber duelist who just couldn't do the stuff that used the force. That was a neat thing. In essence, Saga Edition of the 3 versions was ridiculously flexible in what you could do. If you could think of the character by taking the right combinations of classes, talents, and feats, you could probably do it. Now, one of the more interesting things that Saga did is it went back to the classic hit points version of D20. But it also added something called the condition track. And what would happen is whenever you took damage of a certain amount, that would push you down the condition track. There were also talents that could push you down the condition track. And even abilities like Force Stun that could push you down the condition track. And what happened is each time you got pushed down the condition track, you started taking penalties. And when you got pushed all the way to the end, you could no longer act. You were exhausted or dazed or unconscious. And what you could do is you could take actions over 2 rounds. If you had certain feats, you could do it over 1 round to move yourself back up the condition track. But that meant you had to take a bit of time where you were not acting, where you were not moving, you were not fighting, you were taking a breather in the middle of the fight. The great example of this can also be seen in the classic duel on Naboo between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul. When you see Obi-Wan just meditating while locked off from the fight between Maul and Qui-Gon. Yeah, remember, at this point, he's been exhausted. He was probably fairly low on his condition track. So, he just spent those rounds that he couldn't do anything meditating, i.e., resting, recovering, moving back up the condition track. So that when he started fighting Maul again, he was fully prepared. And that is the Wizards of the Coast D20 Star Wars games. Next week, I'm going to talk about the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, the newest edition. I look forward to that. Until then, I just want you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.